So in this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at a couple of smaller, independent science fiction movies, each of which were produced uh, on a certain amount of limited budget, had a certain amount of special effects put in. We're trying to tell very grand, epic stories that many might consider beyond their reach or scope, but most importantly, they were written and directed by one person in each individual case. The writer was the director was the writer. Now, in some cases, this can work out really well. You have a story that's been adapted, or a director who has contributed to the writing process certain ideas or adaptations. You see this in works like Cloud Atlas, for instance, where you have amazing visuals, different kinds of characters introduced in the story, and the story is taken in different directions than you're necessarily expecting. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of two different stories, each sort of based on things that you've heard or seen before, but in one case, in each case, the films both didn't do well, but I think that one is clearly better than the other just for entertainment value, while the other is not. Anyway, so without further ado, first I'll review Survivor, and then I'll review Upside Down. Survivor was released in 2014. Set in a future over 50 years from now, this film was produced on what is clearly a low budget and takes a lot from other films without the budget or material to justify all the tropes. A brief intro summarizes why they're in space. The Earth's been too polluted. But we then switch to what is obviously going to be a training exercise with smarmy Commander Weston and sexy women in a forest. The trainees fight in slow motion and are all taken down by their captain, Hunter, played by Kevin Sorbo. Sorbo as Captain Hunter actually gives our main character, Kate, some good advice on practicing her punches, starting slow to create muscle memory through repetition to improve her technique. But our heroine, Kate Mitra, played by Daniel Chutran, won't hear of it and just wants Sorbo to shut up and leave her alone. At this point, you notice two things. First, Kate is a lousy student if she supposedly lives for training. Then she would appreciate input from Captain Hunter, rather than rejecting it for the sake of her own ego and pride. People who live for training want training. They want to be corrected and improved. Second, for no clear reason, the training area is just a white void, instead of a set that might have looked a little bit better. At least defining a floor might have helped, as well as seeing others out in it. But instead, we get a ripoff from THX 1138 without half of the gravitas. Although I don't think it's intended to be a ripoff of THX 1138, or even remotely inspired by it. My standard gauge for a storyteller is where we are at the 10-minute mark. At 10 minutes in, we have 4 separate scenes. Scene 1 is Kate in her quarters narrating over her exercising and training her muscles a little bit. Scene 2 is combat exercises in a holographic forest full of slow-motion explosions. Scene 3 is Hunter trying to train Kate in the same holographic chamber, but it's all white now. And Scene 4 is Kate narrating over some trailer shot with a holographic cylinder around her as she wiggles her fingers back and forth to manipulate different things on a star map. When your storytelling and special effects are worse than the outer limits, question the pacing of the storyboarding. It seems like all the sets are green screened, at least for aboard the spaceship, and all the interfaces are supposed to be holographic, which would be tolerable in most things if there wasn't a lack of real set pieces to interact with as well. They didn't even bother to build the door frame to an elevator, making it just look like nothing on the ship can be touched. Elevators make great sets for characters to talk alone in, which is why the turbolift was used so often in Star Trek, and the elevator thing, it wasn't strictly an elevator, but it was an elevator, was used on Babylon 5. It gave two people a chance to speak alone, in isolation, nobody listening in. They could speak in private for a certain amount of time while in transition, instead of walking down a hallway where someone can walk up to you, communication can chime in, what have you. As bad as the green screen sets are, in a briefing at the 11-minute mark, background characters are about the same size as the people in the foreground. They're just blurred in the background. So we don't get any perspective, any foreshortening effect. But to top it all off, we're given some Abrams Star Trek style lens flare in almost every other scene aboard the ship. So the filmmakers saw what other people were doing or had done and just copied it, basically. Having a gray inside of a ship, forget that. We're going to have it all white for the training area, and then everywhere else we're going to have lens flare. I should also mention that apparently in the future, the iPhones are now just implanted in your left forearm with a holographic projector interface. Hunter announces that he'll be taking a scout ship to a planet through a wormhole. Now remember, this is 50 years in the future, and we're supposed to have interstellar travel with huge spaceships. And, you know, we're not using wormholes right, left, and center. You know, I mean, if we're supposed to... The whole idea is that these 7 ships are supposed to be colonizing new worlds, and this is only about 50 years in the future. But we're, you know, not using all these wormholes that were somehow created. I don't know. So the scout ship is damaged in the wormhole, exiting in the upper atmosphere, and Kate falls out of the ship as it's broken in half and parachutes from the upper atmosphere. My disbelief just jumped in to say hello. Then we see what I'm just going to call sand people talking gibberish. We're supposed to get some idea of what is going on, that they want to go and investigate it, but no real idea. They don't bother putting in subtitles or making the gestures really that clear. It's just people in helmets and masks gesturing and talking gibberish. Kate washes ashore, awakening to see a horse run off. Is there any doubt at this point that they landed on Earth? And she sees debris coming down, which starts her on a run for no reason. There is no reason for her to run anywhere, except to build pointless tension. Finally, on top of a stone hill, she decides to check her plot device arm implant that tells her that her friends are crashed on another part of the planet. Of course, a spaceship coming into the upper atmosphere tends to cover hundreds, if not thousands of miles in their descent. Too steep, and they just burn up. But it's the plot device, so let's just try to get through this. More CGI flaming debris comes down to give Kate something to run away from finally, and she jumps into the water for some reason, even though we've shown that she's a lousy swimmer. And of course, she sees her friends sinking in the water. For no real reason, Kate loses her long sleeves at this point and is just in a tank top from here on out. Other survivors from the rest of the ship wash ashore. Somehow, Kate is the only one who knows first aid and CPR. My question is, why aren't any of these people wearing spacesuits? In spaceflight, most astronauts wear spacesuits during travel. It being the future doesn't mean anything. They would still do this, I assume. I'm also wondering why the women would keep their hair so long. If it's the future and these kids were spaceborne, long hair would just be impractical, and the hair would better be used for maintaining food supplies in a farm aboard ship. Anything past the shoulders would just be indulgence. With everyone wearing bodysuits, it hardly seems like anyone would have trouble distinguishing between the sexes. But I digress. Anyway, so Anne dies. Who's Anne? Well, we've barely gotten to know her, except as Kate's friend and Weston's sister. So, who's Weston? Well, he's arrogant and actually more foolhardy than Kate. Anne's death is basically just a distraction for a minute before the group is attacked by the sand people we saw earlier, who are in turn attacked by monsters. So far, this is a better movie than After Earth. I'm going to call these monsters Morlocks. Kate awakes in the Morlock's cave. There she scavenges some clothing from bones of dead bodies, and finally thinks to tie her hair back. One of the Morlocks comes towards her, and she makes a torch so she can escape, for some reason abandoning the fire before she's outside. In a survival scenario, fire is one of the best things you can have with you, but she decides to ditch it and go on another run. Hunter is sitting in a ditch with his leg clearly broken, so we have an After-Earth scenario again. It's going to take her a couple of days to get to him or an intact part of the ship, so Hunter says to make camp and rest to head out in the morning. Bet she wishes she hadn't thrown away her fire. For some reason, it's raining that night, in the desert. Do I need to talk about how a region where it rains at night like that should not be a desert? I mean, if it just rains every night, it can't really be a desert, because the average rainfall would raise the water table up enough. You know what? Let's just move on. In the morning, Kate continues her fun run until she sees the sand people hunting for her and chooses the worst hiding spot to watch them from. Supposedly, they cover the ground better by parkouring over the terrain they know while she's just running, but I just don't see it happening. While hiding, a sand person lets her go. She kills another one by throwing a rock at him. It wasn't even a big rock. She then steals his tomahawks and takes on a group of the sand people in half slow motion and half regular. Because, of course, she beats them, she snags a bow and arrow and takes the promotional pose crouched on a rock with her hood up and continues on her fun run. Because scenes of Daniel Chutran running get monotonous, we get a punctuation from the computer with an update showing she's still 2 days away and a tense scene of Kate free climbing a stone wall. We know that she isn't going to get to him in time, so cue the plot convenience when Kate sees a horse under attack from a bad CGI monster. The horse stays close by, and it seems pretty clear that now she's going to ride it, and it will let her get to the ship and Hunter in time. See, it's new and different because this time it's a woman who's the hero, and she's in harmony with nature instead of working against it. Sarcasm. So she rides the horse bareback and finds a sand people camp that was attacked, and in further plot convenience, there's a bridle. She rides for Hunter and gets to him in time. On her way to the ship, a couple of Morlocks attack and she wastes an arrow. Time for her rock free wall climbing to Time for her rock wall free climbing skills to come in handy again. Near the top, she manages to take down most of them, but runs out of arrows. And just like in After Earth, she has to take the communicator somewhere high to transmit for the ship to come and get them. This thing can transmit across space and through a wormhole, but not from a big open space. It has to be somewhere high. This is just another chance to show Kate climbing. Be consent. But we're only an hour in, so we have to bring back the intrigue. The last of the Morlock group attacks Hunter, and it's up to Kate to track him down. She tracks down the Morlock, who is eating some meat, probably either Hunter or the horse. But whatever, this is supposed to be our boss battle for this act. She does a slow-motion leap at him that accomplishes nothing except leaves her helpless for the sand person who let her go earlier to come to her aid. For no clear reason, she doesn't recognize Rogan as an ally and tries to kill him. This is really just an excuse for Rogan to take his shirt off to get stitches. We're told that what Kate speaks is the ancient tongue. Remember, for Kate, this is 50 years in the future. But for Rogan, this is the ancient tongue. It turns out that the horse belonged to Rogan, and for no reason, Kate says that the horse is hers now. Kate is a bit of a turnip head. Finally, she apologizes for stabbing him in the side when he was offering to help her. And in the dialogue, it's revealed that they came through the wormhole to the year 2452, and humans who stayed underground turned into these creatures whose name means demon. So, yeah, I don't know what name they came up with. I don't remember. It was just some kind of gobbledygook language word, but they're Morlocks. So, they evolved in 440 years from today into what are basically orcs. Disbelief! We're barely 15 minutes after the beacon was sent, and we've been introduced to Rogan and brought on to the rescue part of the film that brings the resolution and climax with the closure to the adventure. I'm actually thinking that with the rushed pacing of the film and about 20 minutes left, it would have been better as a two-part film. Don't get me wrong, it's predictable and mediocre, but a film like this deserves better pacing to at least spell out the crap a little longer. Part 1 could have dealt with the different parts of going on the mission, establishing the bonds of friendship with the shipmates, and giving Kate more of a chance to grow as a person. Then, end Part 1 with Rogan taking off his helmet and offering to help. It's predictable, but it's a good plot twist. Then we spend the second half of the film on the rescue attempt, going back to the lair of the Morlocks, show some stuff with the beacon and the mothership, give Kevin Sorbo some more screen time to show what he's been going through, and have some more time with this adventure. Everything is so compacted down that I have had a hard time enjoying this film, and that's with it feeling padded by scenes of Kate running and climbing. They rush the exposition to show more running and climbing. And don't forget riding and fighting. Maybe we're trying to cash in on some of the Hunger Games plot elements while we're at it. Moving on, Kate resets Hunter's leg with an electric shock. At this point, I don't even have to point out any further that this doesn't make sense, right? Electric shocks don't reset bones. And we already established that the worst injury was the broken rib puncturing his lung. So shocking Hunter and causing him to sharply inhale probably just made him in worse shape, you turnip head. So, our band of heroes have to rescue Rogan's daughter, Nidan, from the arm phone when the arm phone plot device helps them find her no problem. It's like minutes. And here come the Morlocks to attack them. Weston gets bitten pretty badly, and a cave-in separates Kate, Hunter, and Nadon from Rogan and Weston, who have to go out another way. The Morlocks come after both groups. Weston gets the bright idea to make a torch and cue the unsurprising jump scare when another Morlock comes to get them. Hunter tries to tell Kate to make a break with Nadon just so they can exchange that she won't, and she's stubborn, having learned it from the best, him. This substitutes for chemistry since there is no way that Kate and Nadon can go. I mean, they're surrounded on both sides of the cave entrance. Hunter and Kate take on the Morlocks, and the daughter does nothing. After Rogan and Weston show up a day late and $1 short, they get out of the cave only to have Weston shot by an arrow for no clear reason except that it kills him off. We have to listen to the gibberish language exchanged without subtitles and no idea of what they're actually saying. I'm sure that the actors knew what the gibberish meant, but they're barely emoting, just trying to look tough. I think that the guy talking to Rogan is challenging Rogan for leadership or something. Anyway, we get compelling dialogue that nobody understands, and for some reason Rogan and Nadon in the final scene have non-rag clothing in a scene where the ship comes down through the clouds, and Kate has an eye mark like Rogan's. No idea where Hunter is, but since the ship didn't have a captain, who knows? The story ends there, and I can see how the writer and director John Lida would think that this was worthwhile filmmaking, but it sadly fails on so many levels. It's clear that the film was focused on making a blockbuster on a budget, with a tale of survival on a planet with primitives and monsters. It showed off the Utah landscape nicely, but could have served the audience better by slowing down the pacing, instead of focusing on slow-motion action scenes and scenes of Kate running across the desert and climbing rock walls. At 93 minutes, the film could have gone for the full 2 hours and served everyone's purposes far better. The cinematography isn't that bad, but the CGI and creature effects show how little a budget there was with which to work. The description sadly gives away the plot twist. When you describe the primitives as mysterious post-apocalyptic warriors, then you're telling the audience that the barren world is Earth. It's forecast even more by the fact that they're clearly wearing human gas masks and helmets instead of some crude mask made to resemble the Morlocks, which would make a bit more sense. As I said before, the idea that humans would be traveling through space in 50 years in big colony ships and in 440 years would have devolved into horned cave beasts is absurd. There are a lot of leaps of faith in common knowledge that a person has to go through in order to believe the story. I give John Lida points for style, but deduct a lot for some of the areas discussed in this review. I actually think that the German title sounds better, even if it avoided proper conjugation. Sternenkrieger means Stars Warrior, or Warriors of the Stars. Warrior of the Stars, rather. And it's a better title, even if rather banal, but it would have been more accurate as Sternenkriegerin, since she's female. There's no reason not to signify that in the title. I don't fault the actors or the crew for this film for not working hard enough. I think that Lida went for style over substance, and that just made this movie feel like a bowl of unsalted crackers and water. No real texture, flavor, balance, or satisfaction. And barely any substance. Just content in its most basic form. Survivor gets a 1.5 out of 5 for so many violations of my sense of disbelief. It touched me in a bad place. My rationale. Upside Down was released between 2011 and 2013. This is a popular film title, as this was the second film released that year, and just within the past 5 years, no less than 4 other films used this title. At least this one makes some sense in the plot, wherein two young people, Adam and Eden, grew up on worlds that face each other opposite, with gravity that pulls in opposite directions. Yes, this is a weird Canadian and French film where the story is meant to illustrate something more about society. The film stars Kirsten Dunst as Eden and Jim Sturgis as Adam. The explanation of how these worlds exist is actually done rather well in the introduction. You have to really suspend your disbelief, but in this instance, we're looking more at a fantasy than a fiction. The difference is that in fantasy, something strange happening is acting as a didactic plot element. You are told something works this way, and it's rare. That can be accepted because the storyteller admits that it's weird and doesn't quite make sense. Yes, in reality we could not have worlds that were mere feet apart without crashing into one another, without them also having to spin so fast that their days would pass much faster. And it's highly unlikely that any life would evolve on either world, let alone that it would look like humans. But, because this is a fantasy, and the image is an allegory for our world, we can accept it as the audience. We're told that there are three rules for the world with double gravity here. One is called up top, one is called down below, just for sake of reference. An object is only drawn to the world that it comes from. That's not how gravity works in our universe, but as I said, it's fantasy. This attraction can be offset with matter from the other world. So in theory, a person could wear a suit of clothes from the other world and it would be fine. That is until we get to Rule 3, that after a period of time, one piece of matter from one world in contact with the other starts to burn. There's a big company called Transworld that exploits Adam's world, called Down Below, for oil in exchange for electricity from Eden's world, called Up Top. An explosion from the Transworld company destroyed the main city of Adam's world, Down Below, and it turns out that there is a pink material that makes his aunt's pancakes fly and is obviously our plot device for the film. Pink bees gather nectar from both worlds and make pink pollen that makes things act different in relation to gravity, because it combines both worlds. Adam looks at inverse rain at the top of a mountain, and it's there that Adam meets Eden. They begin a romance that is actually pretty cool. At 10 minutes in, I'm interested. I've been allowed to follow 2 scenes after the credits, and the fantastic elements are making a bit of sense. I'm kind of wondering why Eden can sit on the underside of a hook-shaped rock on Down Below and not burst into flames. This will be answered in time. They get together and with their combined masses float around Down Below. But then the authorities catch on and pursue Adam, shooting him and burning down his aunt's home. 10 years later, Adam experiments with pink honey and works at a repair shop. He tries to make a beauty cream using the pink pollen. This gives us an excuse to have interesting scenes with Eden and others from Up Top enjoying a fancy club over on Down Below, where she has to walk on the ceiling and drink from inverted glasses. So the liquid is from Down Below, and I guess the glass is from Up Top. I kind of wish that the song she danced to was a translation of Lionel Richie's Dancing on the Ceiling. Down Below feels like post-war England or Depression-era America, while Up Top is meant to look like contemporary Western America. Eden has amnesia about the experience with Adam, and it's here that it's explained why Eden didn't burst into flames. As long as material from the other world is kept cool, it won't burn. Even though a human being is over 90 degrees, I suppose it's a matter of igniting the air around it or something. Again, this is where you suspend disbelief because it's not sci-fi, it's fantasy. Adam uses a new friendship with a co-worker at the Trans World Corporation on the up top level, and we follow him through a montage where he works on his pollen recipe and hides pieces of heavy metal from up top, talking with Bob about getting a suit. Clearly, my original idea about wearing clothing from the other world wasn't such a dumb idea. Now I'm wondering if the two had children, would the children be able to live on either world? Again, this question will be answered in time. He tries this beauty cream made from the pink pollen out, and it works for short terms, and lets him finalize his plans to see Eden again, putting on shoes and clothes with weights from up top, so that he can see her again. She doesn't remember him, and he toughs it out until he starts to catch fire. A trip to the bathroom nearly spells disaster when Adam's pee hits the ceiling, and an alarm goes off indicating that someone from down below was in the up top bathroom. At this point, I have to praise their casting. Not only do I love Dunst in this role, and there have been parts where I have not cared for her acting at all, but the cast is rounded out with Timothy Spall, best known for playing Peter Wormtail Pettigrew in the Harry Potter franchise, but also Blue Man Kuma, best known for his roles in 2012, the Sci-Fi Channel original miniseries Tin Man, and numerous roles in TV and animation. Unfortunately, Jim Sturgis seems to mostly just smile at people rather than really offering a compelling performance. Unfortunately, a round of firings at Transworld and bonuses, likewise, leads to Bob being dismissed, and a touching moment ensues between he and Adam. Eden calls Adam, who went under Bob's name, to see her again for lunch. So he dons the suit and meets her. It turns out that the cafe that we went to earlier is at the top of a mountain on down below. As Adam lingers, he starts to catch fire and has to make his way to the water, where he sheds his weights and drifts back to down below. Since down below is usually colder, he spends the night warming himself back at his apartment, and it's there that we understand why he chose the place he did, so that he could look through the skylight at the city above him on up top and dream of Eden. That night, at the same time, Eden dreams of her mysterious friend from childhood climbing a tall tree to be with her, saying, "Eden, it's me." Later, Adam demonstrates the product, the beauty cream, and Eden recognizes him, despite him trying to hide his face. He reveals his real name, and she's terribly upset by all of it. He gives chase, but Bob's ID no longer gets him out of the building. On the run, Adam hides out on the underside of a ledge while Eden remembers her first encounter with Adam. Not knowing where else to go, Adam finds Bob. Bob comes up with a vest that doesn't overheat, and Adam shows him how the pink pollen can cause an object to have neutral gravitational pull between the two worlds. Encountering Eden at the cafe, a police raid cuts their reunion short, as she now remembers him, and he is forced to head back to down below. Back on the mountain top where they met, they hold on to one another and float in midair. It's indicated later that they made love. They're walking down the mountain on up top and have to escape by jumping higher into the framework of what clearly was an airship held aloft by stones from down below. I love that we're getting a full picture painted of these two worlds having coexisted for so long in parallel development. She holds on to him from a stone suspended within the framework, but has to let him go. Adam survives by landing in a tree as Eden is escorted off the grounds. Some men from Transworld tell him not to try to contact Eden again and to tell them the ingredient of the aging cream. Meanwhile, Bob hasn't stopped working on the formula for the aging cream and is able to suspend a fish inside of the mixture of the pink pollen and water. Eden gets some strange flowers from the office, pink ones that have been growing inside of the fluid and don't seem to respond quite the same to normal gravity. She finds Bob, and with his help, they both find a way to meet on down below, and she reveals that she's pregnant with twins, which means that she can stay there as long as she wants. So they meet at the Café Dos Mundos, this cafe from earlier, and Bob gets the patent on the beauty cream. As we pull back, we see new buildings on down below, and it becomes clear that for the first time, the two worlds see one another as not such opposites and not so exclusive from one another. Yes, the story is predictable, and Jim Sturgis is far from my pick for a leading man, but overall, this is an enjoyable story, and you could watch it with the kids. When you consider that at the time, a similar company made Life of Pi and shafted the effects companies responsible for the work. While this project gave full credit to the effects houses, I think it's only the fact of the stories that showcase why Upside Down got overshadowed at award ceremonies. I think the cast do a great job, and I hope that this film gains a cult following for all the excellent work that went into it. It's better than what I was expecting for the visuals, the story, and the writing. I can honestly say that I enjoyed the film from beginning to end. Writer and director Juan Diego Solanas deserves a lot of credit for conceiving this film and making it work so well. You're quickly drawn in, and your suspension of disbelief throughout the film is sustained. Things are explained pretty well so that the world you're in makes sense. Gravity works differently here, in ways that work for the story. You can actually withhold skepticism and scrutiny, and let the spectacle and characters motivate you. I'm disappointed that Dunst's character was reduced to more of an object up to the end. I actually like that it isn't just Adam coming to her that resolves things, but her actions that resolve the struggle. I like the message that exclusive societies shouldn't exist between human beings. Some quick research shows that Emil Hirsch was the company's first pick for the role of Adam, and I can't blame them. I can't say whether or not Hirsch would have done better, since I've only seen him in Milk and Speed Racer, and don't remember either of his performances, especially since I liked Milk. But I think that if he had managed to have less of his acting consist of grinning like a horny teenager, that Jim Sturgis might have been able to have made it work better. I'm confused about the release date, as this film was released in Kazakhstan and Canada in 2012. The copyright says 2011, and it was released in the US, France, and elsewhere in 2013. The mix of releases over the course of a year, combined with a predictable plot of star-crossed romance that unites two worlds, may be why it flopped at the box office, not even earning back half of what it cost to produce. I understand that Gravity doesn't work like this, having said so from the start of this review, but I still enjoyed the film. It's well told, has good twists in storytelling, the visuals work, the characters are likable, and I enjoyed watching it. Upside Down is better paced than similar stories, and in under 2 hours makes for a pretty good movie. Like I said, it would be good to watch with kids and entertains a more visual viewer. It's not a perfect film, and I was set to give it just below a full score, but I'm giving it a generous 5 out of 5 for effort and entertainment value. If I'm actually interested enough to keep watching and the character motivations work for me, then I will stand by it as worth your time, dear viewers. Check it out on DVD or online and settle in for some imaginative cinema reminiscent of Georges Méliès' A Trip to the Moon and similar science fiction that blended elements of fantasy, even if the stories were familiar. You'll be entertained and stirred to think about your world a little differently, which is the goal of all good science fiction or fantasy stories.